If you grew up being called the good girl, the one who never talked back, always helped out, got the good grades, you probably thought it was a compliment until you realize it came from a lot of guilt, probably perfectionism, and even this constant fear of disappointing people that you love. Today, we are talking about what it really means to recover from the good girl script with fellow therapist Stephanie Soradi. She is a licensed clinical social worker, creator of the Good Girl Rehab, and we're going to break down why so many high achieving women, cycle breakers, end up burnt out and actually disconnected from their own needs. If you ever wondered, who am I without the good girl role? This episode is for you. And before we get started, I do wanted to just ask you if you like this content and this podcast, the Heal and Manifest podcast, please like this video, share it with your loved ones, and don't forget to subscribe. I am Cynthia Flores. I am your host, and welcome. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. I know that you have been working with so many women who have held on to this role, whether in their families or in other areas of their lives, of being the good girl. I've had my own journey when it comes to really healing and breaking a lot of these generational cycles. But I'm curious for you, in your own personal experience, share a little bit of who you are and what you do, and how are you connected to this kind of good girl role? How has this relate to your own personal life?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. That's a great way to kick this off because you are also a therapist. So I think you can relate to this probably. We end up in so many ways in this field doing the work that we've needed, it starts with doing the work on ourselves. And then some of us feel called to help others do the same. That's definitely the case for me. I grew up in a very parentified role, like where I was more of a parent, a co-parent versus a kid growing up. And that was something that was really praised. It was always, oh, your daughter's so mature for her age. She's so wise. She's so polite. I was referred to from a really young age, actually, as like the family therapist. So
Mm.
it's not surprising that I became a therapist, I guess. And it's not that any of those things are objectively bad. To be mature, to be wise, to be there to help people through difficult times. But when you start to tie your identity to this external measure of good, what does it mean to be, what do others think it means for me to be good? Then it starts to create problems in our relationship with ourselves and how we relate to work, how we relate to achievement, how we show up in our relationships, our friendships, romantic relationships. It really does start to permeate multiple areas of life. And that's where we get burnt out, like you said. You can really get burnt out if you're constantly performing for others instead of doing things because they're in alignment with who you are.
And for you, what was like that pivotal moment when you realized, like, wow, I have been carrying this role in my life, and like you having that self-realization of the impact that it has had on different areas of your life? I want to know that, and also what areas of your life it was impairing or impacting.
I think it has happened in phases for me. Like, I think the initial realization happened, this must have been 2019, I believe, or 2018 about. I was in graduate school for my master's in social work. And as this tends to happen, I started noticing a lot of triggers with the populations I was serving and working with, where I felt a lot of guilt and shame for not being able to fully resolve my clients' problems. That expectation was not explicitly put on me by anyone. That's just how I felt. And so I started to go to therapy. That would be my second time in therapy, but this is like the most dedicated stretch of therapy I think I ever had. So I went back to therapy started working with a new therapist, started talking to her about the dynamics that I was facing at my internships, the dynamics that I faced with my family of origin. And she really got down to identifying what role I was playing in perpetuating the pressure and the perfectionism. And long story short, as we're like sort of unraveling these layers of why do I feel the need to be good all the time? Why am I so afraid of people seeing me as bad? It really came down, of course, to childhood attachment wounds that I was facing. And I realized, I remember sitting in her office because this was probably just before the pandemic at this point, before we went virtual. I was sitting in her office and I was like, oh my God, Bianca, that's why I became a social worker, because I really want to be good. I want to be seen as good. I want to prove that I'm good. And that's not a good reason to become a social worker.
Wow.
And that's when it all started. So
Mm.
I've been continuing to do that work on myself pretty consistently ever since. And I feel like with anything in life, you know this with Heal and Manifest, there's just layers to things. You're never fully done, but you don't have to be done. That's not the point. The point is just to create a better relationship with yourself over time. And I think that's what, as uncomfortable as it's been, I think that's what sort of the recovering good girl has done for me. It's given me a better relationship with myself.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious, based on your own personal experience and even, as a therapist doing this work with others and helping others really process and identify these roles, how would you define the good girl script? And how is this so intertwined with
Hmm.
culture, society's expectations, our own internalized expectations, but even like family dynamics? Because I know you mentioned that it came from a lot of attachment wounds from your experience, but how is it all tied in?
This is a really good question. I found myself attracting a lot of therapy clients that had really similar experiences to me, just organically. I wasn't necessarily seeking out these clients. We just attracted each other, I think. And that's when I did start to notice, like, oh, this is a pattern. This is not, we always think it's just me. There's something wrong with me. It's just me. Working with my clients gave me a lot of peace and clarity of like, oh, this is a more systemic issue. It's not something that I did. It's something that a lot of people are experiencing. And I do think culture plays a big part in it. For example, my mom's an immigrant from Mexico. Like a vast majority of my clients are daughters of immigrants from various parts of the world. And something that we have in common is trying to balance what does it mean to be a good daughter, a good woman, a good girl in your family's culture, your culture of origin, and now that you're here in the United States. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're conflicting. And I think overall, what I dislike about the good girl script or the conditioning that we face is that it is so determined by how are you of service to others in a more extreme toxic way than just like being helpful, being kind. It's be helpful, be kind. Also, don't have needs. Don't be too loud, but also don't be too quiet because then you'll come across as rude. Don't ask for too much. Be grateful always. You need to do all of these things and make it look effortless. You need to be the family therapist. You need to be the family logistics manager. You need to be the caretaker to other people in your family. And you really can't complain while doing it. So
Mm.
it's an impossible standard to live up to, ultimately, is what I've realized.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a lot of different roles, and these are all things that I've seen and that I've also had to personally work through. And I'm still, again, the guilt is going to come up. And I
Hmm.
always tell my clients feeling guilt, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad person because guilt often tells us we're not doing enough. There's
Right.
something wrong with us. But the reality is, when we externalize that narrative and story that we tell ourselves, we see the emotions for what they are, that it's okay for us to have these feelings, but they don't define us. But that is really hard when you've been so conditioned and that's how you've operated all of your life. So until you come to therapy or you do your inner work and you're really reflecting and building that self awareness and that consciousness, you realize, wow, I've held on to this narrative and story that it really no longer serves me, because I'm like either sabotaging myself in different areas at work, or I'm so burned out. I'm doing so much for everyone in my family, and I don't not even able to fill up my own cup. What's going on? And almost like in esa desesperación that I know that a lot of my clients do come in, and they're tired of feeling shame and guilt and like this constant negative inner dialogue, that negative inner critic self-talk, that they recognize can't live like this anymore. Like, it's not serving me, it's not helpful. My relationship with myself is just like,
Yes.
who am I outside of these roles? We internalize because we're hypersensitive little human beings internalizing everything.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, what do you think are other emotional and mental costs to see women, and not only women, I do work with a lot of men too that
Hmm.
have experienced the pressure.
Hmm.
What is the mental and emotional cost that people hold having this good girl, the good daughter, like the good person overall role?
I think you named an emotion that comes up a lot, which is like desesperación. So this sort of like frustration meets impotence almost that comes from, I think, something else you said, this question that we have unanswered, which is who am I outside of these roles? And you feel that desesperación because you have not, for whatever reason, had the opportunity to explore that. So there is this like inner battle of like, I want to show up for everybody. I want to be a really good child to my parents. I want to be a good sibling. I want to be a good partner, but I don't know what it means to just be me. That causes a lot of conflict. I see it come up. I think relationships, like romantic relationships, relationships with our parents or caretakers, and work are the big three themes that I see this come up in. Probably because culturally in the US, we identify our whole being with work, which is another big issue. And then, of course, with our parents or any caretaker, those are your first attachments. That's where you're going to feel the most like, I really want you to like me. And then that tends to translate to our romantic relationships where we recreate a lot of those patterns that we had with our caretakers. So I will see folks come in, and and you're right, I do see men come in with this. It just tends to look a little different because of how we're socialized. But I will see a client come in, for example, and be like, someone comes to mind of, I have my own business. I am doing really well. I'm the first person in my family to do this. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm the first entrepreneur. Everything looks good on paper, but I'm so unhappy
Mm.
and I
Mhm.
don't know why. And I can't motivate myself to do the things that I know I should be doing. Like I should be marketing more. I should be networking more. I should be doing all these things. And I can't figure out why. And I think the root of that why is that disconnect from self.
Where do you think perfectionism lies in this? The should have, the could have, the would haves, right?
Yes.
The expectations, because I'm sure expectations and perfectionism go hand in hand. But how have you seen this kind of pattern and this come up?
I think perfectionism develops as a coping mechanism for being in survival mode for a really long time. We tend to think that what is familiar is safe. That's just how our brains are. The brain isn't actually designed or constructed for you to be happy. It's designed for you to be safe. It's a very ancient tool. Our brains haven't evolved in a very long time. So they just want to keep you safe. And if
Mhm.
you grew up knowing this pattern of like perfectionism, like I'm going to do the most all the time, I'm going to show up for everyone all the time, you're going to keep perpetuating it as an adult because it feels safe, even though you're exhausted, you're irritable, you have no motivation. It makes perfect sense that you're doing it because it's all you've ever known. But once we stop trying to recreate that cycle of trying to be perfect all the time and shaming ourselves for not being perfect all the time, we can see that beneath it is a fear of like, am I safe? Am I loved? Am I okay? And that's really, I think, the discomfort that a lot of us, myself included, like we want to shy away from because that doesn't feel familiar. That doesn't feel safe to look at those big questions.
So I do see is the part of the self, right? The relationship with oneself. Can I even accept myself in the ways that I am now, in the ways that I'm showing up now, and also the internalized expectations from oneself,
Yeah.
right? Because again, the expectations can come from society, right? Either spoken or unspoken, from our family dynamic, from our career and the load, right? The expectations there, whether it's spoken or unspoken, that we internalize too. So it's not that it's like all just perception, it's perception and how we've navigated our life, the world, our worldview, and also in relation to all of these other things. But I also see that coming back to the self, the relationship to the self acceptance, I think plays a big role in this too, because if we're constantly expecting perfectionism, or I need to do this, I should do this because XYZ, or else I'm not successful, or else I'm a failure, or I'm going to, or else these whole concepts around also success and failing can lead to a
Yeah.
negative concept around other people's perceptions of you. And going back to the recovering good girl, your work focuses on recovering good girl and like good girl rehab. Tell me a little bit about why you named your work in that way. What does that entail?
Yeah. I think you said all that beautifully, by the way, that it is so much the perception. It's kind of like a lens that we look at things through. And that's what I started to realize with the clients I was working with. Like, a lot of us are looking at the world through the lens of, am I good enough? And coming up with evidence to show, no, I'm not good enough because I'm not beautiful enough, smart enough, successful enough, selfless enough. I'm not all of these things that we're told we need to be. I think women have a soft spot for me because our bodies tend to be a big part of that too. The body, the physical self is something that, because of, what makes corporations money is for us to never think that it's good enough. It's so hard to like sit in your own body and feel like it's not enough. So I started to notice this is the lens that we're looking at things through, like, am I good enough? And then who has defined what it means to be good? It's usually these different layers that we talked about. It could be culture, it could be family culture, it could be society at large. And I am someone who is familiar with recovery for many reasons. I grew up in a family with a lot of alcohol abuse. And then when I was a new therapist, I worked at the local veterans hospital with a lot of veterans in recovery from substance misuse and things like that. And I've done a lot of work for myself on recovering from being the type of person that enables substance use because I want to be good and I want to make people happy. So the idea of recovery is like a very present theme in my life in general. And I just liked the idea of, well, what would it mean to recover from being a good girl all the time? If you don't have to be good anymore, then who do you get to be?
Mhm.
And how do we start to make it so that you feel safe enough to explore that? So I have a Substack where I do a weekly newsletter and I touch on different topics related to being a good girl in recovery. Things like, how can I tell if it's my intuition or anxiety talking? How can I be assertive but also be kind? How can I set boundaries with people that I love? Things like that that no one teaches us, but are so key for protecting that relationship to the self. And protecting the relationship to the self means that you have healthier, happier relationships with everyone else in your life.
Thanks for sharing that. And for women listening to this and questioning themselves, being hard on themselves, struggling with constantly having to carry these multiple roles and hats in their family, whether chosen or unchosen, right? Because I think that oftentimes we fall into these identities and roles out of desperation, out of need. Say, for instance, you become a caregiver as a daughter, and sometimes there's no other choice. There's no other possibilities. So you get to do that. And that's something that I do see a lot in clients struggling with, how do I show up? How can I care about my family? I want to be there for them, but I'm also just figuring out what I want outside of this internalized expectation
Yeah.
that I put on myself, and that maybe even sometimes it's unspoken and that my family want from me.
Hmm.
So, for women in that situation, like what are the first steps for them to do to start reflecting, processing, identifying?
Yeah, I love the example that you gave because that is a common experience. And I think it's a good example that highlights sometimes we are put in these positions. Why would you have no other choice than to be a caregiver? Because we don't, at least here in the States, we don't live in a society that has other solutions set up for us. Healthcare is expensive. Getting help is expensive. We tend to not live in close proximity to our communities. It's very isolating in a lot of ways. There's so much missing from society that puts us in that position. And I want to point that out to identify one of the first steps, which is acknowledging, like, where is this coming from? Where am I getting this pressure? Is it that my parents immigrated here, didn't speak any English, and guess what? The United States doesn't have a lot of systems set up to support immigrant families. So the burden, so to speak, of helping these people navigate a whole new country fell on me when I was 7 years old. So acknowledging, like, where did this come from? It may come from your parents. If we have emotionally immature parents or emotionally immature caretakers, it's really likely that they are going to put some emotional burden on the child. Something like parentification. Emotional parentification tends to come from a home where there's some sort of unaddressed mental health stuff going on. And I think identifying, like, where's this coming from helps to externalize it, helps to make sense of it. And you get to say, okay, so it's not me. It's coming from all these different places. These are all the messages that I've been given. And then to ask yourself, how have I internalized these messages? And how are they showing up in my life? So kind of doing like an inventory where you may start to notice, like, damn, I do tend to take care of all my romantic partners. Every time I get into a relationship, I'm the one who's like organizing all the dates. I'm the one who is initiating the hard conversations. I'm the one carrying the emotional burden here because that's what I'm used to. It may show up at work where you are the person that people can depend on, which is great, but you also struggle to set boundaries. So folks are going to pile work on you. And just taking that inventory, like, where is this showing up? Where is it coming from? Where is this showing up? And then where is it no longer serving me? Where am I really feeling the effects of, like, okay, this is no longer a strength. Like, it's gone too far in the opposite direction and it's starting to hurt me. So you may say relationships, right? I want to stop being the emotional caretaker in my relationships. And my advice to people when you get to this point of you're like, okay, this is what I've identified, it's no longer working, is to be really gentle with yourself. It's a lot to undo and start with baby steps. Start with, like, noticing the urge of, like, I really want to be the only person. I'm feeling the urge to be the person initiating in my relationship again. But this time it is scary, it is unfamiliar. I'm going to voice to my partner that I would like for them to initiate in the relationship more. Initiate hard conversations, initiate date nights, initiate chores, whatever it is. But starting really small so that you get to, like, see your brain again, going back to that ancient brain. So it gets to see, like, okay, this is scary, but I am safe when I do it. Like, nothing terrible is happening because I'm not being the good girl, so to speak. I'm just doing something different and seeing how that works.
I love that. Something that came up for me romantically when I started dating, I got into these different roles and I realized I don't have to treat my man like he's a baby, like he's a grown ass functional adult. I can't cater to
Yeah.
his needs all the time. I need to take care of me. And I know that personally, what has helped me and how I've helped many women is to help them identify their relationship dynamics.
Mm.
Even doing some kind of a list. What roles do I take in this relationship? And then doing that exercise with yourself first, and then also doing that with your partner. And what roles does the partner take?
Yeah.
That's something that I recently did with my husband, and we realized, okay, there's something some uneven things in here that we need to like distribute, so that way we are both supported and we both feel seen and we're working as a team. Of course, that is another level because not everyone has that trust or even that dynamic, right? But that's something that can be created with safety, with building trust, with building communication by setting those boundaries and saying, well, this is where I'm at. I'm feeling like I'm carrying a lot in this part and I would like some support. And this is what I need in this situation. Is this something that we can work? And it's a lot about negotiating, being open and flexible, but also with ourselves. And that's where I think a lot of people, a lot of clients get stuck. It's like, oh my gosh, it's scary, it's uncomfortable speaking up and setting boundaries in a way that I don't feel like I'm being selfish. But
Yeah.
so that comes up a lot. So loving boundaries don't mean that you're setting these because you don't care. It means that you're
Mm.
setting these because you do care and you do want to maintain your relationships and you want to build healthy relationships and connections, but it's about prioritizing your needs too and not leaving them in the back burner.
I love this so much. You said like two phrases that I'm always practicing with clients, which is I feel and I need. That is like, it seems so simple. It seems so small, like, oh, that's obvious, but it's not obvious. If you identify with like anything we've talked about, that's a really good place to start implementing the change is saying, I feel, and identifying what you're feeling is like, I feel overwhelmed. And then what do you need? I need support or I need someone to listen to me. And go to like someone who is safe. Like you said, I love that you and your spouse did that exercise. That's such a good idea. I think everyone should do that in relationships. If you don't have that with a romantic partner, who do you have that little bit of safety with that you can communicate? Hey, I'm working on changing a little bit of how I show up and I feel stressed and I need to vent about it. Are you available to listen? You could do that with a friend. You could practice this with your therapist. I think people forget when we go to therapy, that's a relationship and that's a really good space to practice maybe like asking for what you need instead of just being like, oh, well, the therapist is going to know what to do or they're in charge. Like you're in charge in that situation. It's a great place to practice saying, "Oh, I know that we're doing this." Like, for example, I do EMDR therapy with a lot of folks. So I tell my clients, like, you can tell me, I don't want to do EMDR today. I need to vent. Or you can tell me, I don't want us to just talk today. I need to do some EMDR on this. That
Mhm.
little practice that you just shared of like, I feel and I need is so powerful.
Absolutely. Not everyone can distinguish that because a lot of us grew up not knowing what we wanted and needed. We suppressed these things, or we were told, like, you're little, you don't have needs, like, your voice doesn't count, your voice doesn't matter. And that's something that I had to personally work through is finding my voice and being comfortable and safe enough. Because the reality is that I don't think we're going to be feeling fully safe or we're going to be fully healed. That doesn't exist, but that we know that regardless what everybody thinks, everybody's perceptions of us, that it doesn't matter because you know who you are, you stand in your truth. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. I think that that's something that I work through a lot,
Mm.
that with clients is building that stress tolerance to being okay with discomfort, being okay with knowing that your stomach's gonna feel weird, your shoulders are gonna tense up, your hands are probably gonna be sweating. Those are all somatic responses that are very normal, very common when you are learning to do something new, when you're learning to get out of your comfort zone. And the more that you practice that, the more comfortable you start feeling, you start building your stress tolerance. So that way, these things, even as you practice them and do them, they're going to be less and less uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that is part of this process that it's going to take practice.
I love that you normalize the discomfort because that I think people think if they are uncomfortable, they're doing it wrong. But I have been working on doing all of this for myself for like 7 years. And there's a family member that I have that when I need to set a boundary with them, my voice still shakes sometimes. And that doesn't mean that I'm not doing it right. It just means that it's still a little scary. That's my inner child being like, oh my gosh, are you going to upset this person? And I do it even though my voice is shaky. And that's just how you start to feel more comfortable with it.
Mhm. That's what it is. And that brings me back to one last question around
Mm.
building your sense of self. How do we start building more of neutral self talk, more compassionate self talk that also builds on our self confidence and our self worth? How do we start doing that?
Yeah, that's a really great question because I think a lot of us do speak to ourselves in a very harsh way, where if you were to say those things out loud to another person, you'd probably be like, oh my God, that's so messed up. Why would you talk to someone that way? So there's a few exercises that can help with that. One that I really like, I have one right here. I tend to keep a picture of myself as a kid around. I don't know if you could see it. That's me and my dad. That's the bar that I grew up in, which also tells you why I became a therapist, that I grew up in a bar. But I'll keep a picture of
Right.
my younger self, and let's say that there's something that I'm scared to do, which is all the time. I will talk to her and I'll talk her through it. Like, I'll look at her and I'll be like, "You're gonna be okay. You are so brave, you are so kind, and you are gonna handle this perfectly. Like, you're so beautiful. There's nothing wrong with you. Why don't you, my inner child, why don't you go play? You go hang out, you go do what you need to do, and I'm the grown-up version of you, and the grown-up version of you, she's got this. We've got this." It helps to start talking to yourself in a kinder way if you're looking at a little kid, because as an adult, you're gonna have that more empathetic, compassionate, protective perspective of a child, but it is you,
Absolutely.
right? So that's a really nice way to start. If that still feels uncomfortable, as it can, if we had a lot of negative childhood experiences that might feel too uncomfortable to start with, you can start by something that you pointed out is, what would be a neutral way to talk to myself then? You can say, normally I think to myself if I mess up, oh my God, you're so stupid. I can't believe you did that again. And I like to write things, so I recommend folks like write it out. On one side, you could put, I'm so stupid. On the other side, what is a more neutral way of saying this to yourself? I'm still learning. I'm still figuring things out, and that's okay. And you could start practicing from the harsh, mean voice to the neutral voice. Or, like I said, you can get a picture of your younger self. I had one of me and like a perrito that I got in Mexico for
Mhm.
when I was a kid. My family used to give me dogs, ducks, pigs, whatever. It's a picture of me with this puppy. So very childlike as my screensaver because I was speaking so poorly to myself for so long that I needed that constant reminder of like, that's who you're talking to. And you need to talk to her more kindly. So try out a few different exercises. They're going to feel uncomfortable, but keep practicing and see if one starts to resonate with you.
This has been such a great conversation. I'm sure our listeners are going to really resonate. And I really hope they take these different exercises and tools that we're really giving them and help them kind of reflect on their own experience and really build that sense of self awareness and how they can move forward and start implementing these little by little. What is one last thing that you'd like to tell anyone who's wanting to work on shifting this good girl role and narrative?
I think one reflection question that I really like to use today, even, is I think in the good girl narrative, we tend to ask ourselves, what are other people going to think of me if I do or don't do something? And I like to flip it back and ask, what am I going to think of me if I do or don't do something? And starting there is a really beautiful, easy way of reconnecting to the self. So maybe other people might think she's being so selfish. She's not doing these things that we think someone should do. But what am I going to think of me? I might think that was pretty brave. That was pretty badass. Or that gave me some freedom. And I appreciate that. So it's a really nice little reframe that anyone can try is, what do I think of me?
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And
Of
how can
course.
people work with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I think a good place, the place where I really am loving and living these days is Substack, and you can find it at Good Girl Rehab. I'm also on Instagram at Steph Soradi. And to work with me, if anyone is in California or Florida, to work with me as a therapist, my website is Luz Trauma Therapy.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Of
I
course.
appreciate you being here.
Thank you,
And
Cynthia.
of course, and for everyone that tuned in, don't forget to like, put a comment in this video to boost it and subscribe. And I hope that you take all of these different tools and apply them into your life. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.